Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. Today, we have a very special college football preview featuring Brian Fremeau, the creator of the College Football FEI Ratings. Aaron, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm ready for a football season to start, and that includes college football. And college football this weekend is a lot better than the NFL that's on this weekend. So college football all the way this weekend, believe me.
Yeah, absolutely. Not too tuned into those week 4 preseason games.
No, not really.
You're not responsible for making those roster cuts. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. I, too, am excited for college football to start in week 1, especially off of a very turnover-friendly week 0 last weekend. I think we got our college football preseason out of the way as well.
We had to be able to trade that chain around, right? We needed enough turnovers that Miami could move their chain from player to player.
Yes, it was a very TV-friendly statistical effort, I think.
I like the turnover chain. I think they need to do more work on the touchdown ring or whatever that was. That part, I think they got to work out a couple of kinks.
There's always room for innovation in whatever sideline shenanigans we can come up with this year. So college football has no shortage of that.
Okay, Brian. So let's start off and let's talk about the FEI ratings, because I think that's probably going to be a lot of what we're going to be talking about as we talk about the specific teams, kind of the currency that we'll be living in a little bit. So what are the FEI ratings and what do they tell us?
At the end of the day, FEI boils down to opponent-adjusted per possession efficiency. So I am at the data collection point of things, looking at college football at a drive-by-drive, possession-by-possession level. I'm evaluating the success of those drives based on starting field position and ending field position, and adjusting for the strength of an opponent based on how successful they are at either stopping an opponent from scoring when they have the ball or scoring, of course, when they own the ball themselves. It's sort of the essential back and forth of a given game. Certainly the play-by-play level. I have great colleagues and friends who work at that level, and certainly at the Aaron and others at Football Outsiders are focused on the play level. But I have found my sweet spot as an analyst in the drive venue because it's a really tangible and consistently applied factor in the game. So I isolate on that, and FEI is simply the ultimate 1 to 130 ranking of all FBS teams according to how well they manage possession efficiency.
So that makes a lot of sense to me, sort of the drive-based analysis. One question that comes up just from doing some drive-based analysis on my own would be, how are you handling special teams within the ratings? Is that something that's included?
It is, but I acknowledge that it isn't a primary factor, especially it's not a primary predictive factor.
Right, it's not going to be very predictive to begin with. So,
correct. The main way I break it out is each of the special teams units is essentially plays a transitional role between possessions. If there's a punt, there's a way to evaluate the success of the punt team and the punt return team based on where expected field position should be, according to national averages, or similarly with the kickoff team. How successful is a field goal unit from a given yard line nationally? And that's how I run my special teams efficiency ratings. But at the end of the day, special teams isn't going to predict the next game's special team success with all that much accuracy. So though I factor it in terms of its extraction of data, it isn't a major factor in how I produce the overall FEI ratings, which are much more focused on offensive and defensive efficiency.
Makes sense to me. Any other questions about the ratings you wanted to get into, Aaron, before we start taking a trip around the country?
Well, I'm very experienced with them. I mean, we've been dealing with them at Football Outsiders for over a decade. We've been running Brian's analysis. And, folks know that at Football Outsiders, we also have the SP Plus ratings by Bill Connolly, which are more of a play-by-play breakdown, although we're going to have a little less of that going forward now that Bill is exclusive to ESPN. And then in the Football Outsiders Almanac, we run a set of projections that are combined between the two ratings. But I think today we're going to be talking primarily about Brian's stuff and Brian's projections.
All right, so let's jump right into it and start with the SEC, where I think the consensus is that you would have two really top national title contenders, obviously Alabama there, and also Georgia. Brian, what do the FEI ratings tell us about the top contenders in the SEC?
You're right on the money that Alabama and Georgia are the top contenders. I have both of them in my numbers emerging as the favorites in the SEC West and East, respectively. But the key thing with the SEC is that everyone in the conference seems to be strong in my ratings this year. It's a little bit of a glimpse into how strong they were last year, since recent success is a major factor in the preseason projections. But I have three other SEC West teams along with Alabama in my top 8, LSU, Mississippi State, and Auburn. So the idea that Alabama is a favorite in the conference is certain, but the fact that they're going to be challenged more consistently week to week than maybe some of the other conference contenders suggests that they will have opportunities to trip up and fall. And so I'm very curious to see if the SEC as a conference will be so dominant and so strong that it actually might kind of eat itself this year.
Yeah, and I'm wondering whether your own projections and the updated projections that you've done come out with the same result that we ended up with in the Almanac, which is that Alabama's schedule is so difficult this year that the most likely result is that there'll be a 2-loss team and thus possibly miss the playoff, even though they're the number 1 team in projected actual quality.
That's a great point. My numbers are a little more generous to them being a margin above the rest of their division contenders than our F+ rating suggested. But their most likely scenario is to lose at least once. I have them losing a game. It's most likely perhaps to be that LSU rivalry game in November. But they do it. They have a chance in my numbers to maybe I think it's a 20% chance of losing 2 or more, and that's exactly for that reason. There are too many contenders to be confident that they'll run the table. And in a 4-team playoff scenario where 0 and 1 loss teams are the only teams that have been selected in 5 years to date, it does suggest that there's a razor thin margin for error, even for Alabama, the best team in the nation.
And I'll point out that you said, 4 teams in the SEC West are in the top 8, and they play 3 of them in the last 4 weeks of the season. 2 of those are on the road, Mississippi State and Auburn.
Exactly. So they'll be fine until November rolls around, and that's when the rubber will hit the road. And in fact, in most years, Alabama is cruising until they get to November. When they've run that table in November, or when they've been at their strongest, they're in the playoff and they're winning national championships. But they've tripped up against Auburn. They've tripped up against LSU before. Maybe not as recently against the Tigers, but LSU. But it's there, and that's what's going to come around towards the end of the year.
So I'm really interested in looking at the Georgia side of this. Obviously, Tua was second in the country in independent quarterback rating last year, our statistic that takes quarterback rating and limits it to only things within the quarterback's control. He was second behind Kyler Murray, but Jake Fromm was 5th in the country, ahead of Dwayne Haskins, ahead of Trevor Lawrence. And I'm starting to wonder, okay, maybe we think Alabama is a better team overall if we're ranking them compared to Georgia. But with the Georgia's schedule, are they actually more likely to be a playoff team than Alabama, or are we not ready to go that far?
I am ready to go that far. In fact, I think if I'm picking the playoff team to get out of the SEC, I would pick Georgia. I don't think that they're necessarily better than Bama, but they're fewer landmines, like you said. They are almost their equal in terms of recruiting prowess and even performance on the field of late. And this is probably the year. If I'm gonna lean, I'm gonna lean on Georgia. They're gonna be less banged up at the end of the year because the SEC East is not quite as a gauntlet. So my numbers suggest that Alabama is still the favorite when they would face each other eventually in the SEC championship game, and even a favorite to have a more likely undefeated record. But if I'm going to pick a team personally to emerge out of the SEC, and I'm limited to one, I'm going to lean Georgia.
All right, let's move up the coast. Going to the ACC up next. I think there's one team here everybody knows. Is there anybody that can challenge Clemson? And I should mention, they're going to play tonight before this podcast airs tomorrow. I don't expect that they'll have any problems, but is there anybody that can compete with them in the ACC this year, Brian?
I don't think so. In fact, my numbers suggest the next best team is Florida State, who had a losing record last year. I mean, this is heading into this year. There are really no other true challengers in the ACC, so I do think Clemson is going to cruise. Now, each of the last few years when they've had really strong success of late, they've been to they've made 4 straight playoff appearances. They have had at least one game where they've nearly tripped up or have tripped up, and everyone, including myself, might be circling a road trip to Syracuse on the list this year. But even that game suggests to me that though it might be their toughest opponent, they still should win by double digits. And I imagine they not only are going to cruise into the playoff, but I think they're going to cruise to a Heisman Trophy with Trevor Lawrence as the quarterback.
Any argument there from you, Aaron?
No, I mean, I'm looking at their schedule. The only game that they have against a team that's in our top 20, I think, is Texas A&M in the second game of the season, and that's at home.
That's right. They get them at home. They get the Aggies at home. They did play a tough one against them and a tight one against them on the road, but A&M's one of those teams, again, not a heavyweight in the SEC West according to our numbers, but a challenger to someone who might cause some trouble for those other SEC West teams. But they get them in Death Valley. I don't think Clemson. Certainly, that there's a sophomore slump factor. There could be a rest on your laurels factor. We've seen that with other teams that are riding the wave of a national championship. But it's still a young team. I mean, Trevor Lawrence as the quarterback is a sophomore. They've got young receivers, elite receivers. I think this team is gonna cruise. They're going to dominate this year.
I think that they emphasize one of the primary points of the college research that we've done at Football Outsiders, which is the importance of the program's quality from year to year. It's sort of shocking given that players move on after 4 years or sometimes 3 years, but college teams are actually more predictable from year to year than NFL teams are. And the primary reason for that is recruiting. So Clemson can lose 8 starters from their defense from last year and still be projected to be like one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the country because they've recruited so well for the last couple of years.
They're also recruiting far and away better than any of their local competition in the ACC. I mean, that isn't something we've done maybe specific research on, but it is really relevant when you're talking about how clear is a path to the playoff or how clear is a path to a conference championship.
But we know that the program FEI ratings, which are the sort of historically how good is the team, are more important in college than they are in the pros. There's more.
That's exactly right.
And I think that's because certain programs just have that moxie and they do the recruiting and they bring in the talent. And so they're good year after year. And right now, Clemson is one of those programs.
I'd take it a step further and say that, yeah, recruiting is where it all starts. And that's why you have less parity in college football at the end of the day. You're going to have, the same teams winning 12 games year after year after year until there are kind of the larger shifts that happen when coaches change and things like that. One player I wanted to hit on before we moved on is the running back, Travis Etienne. He is such a fun prospect to watch. And my favorite stat that we found on him is that he led the country's running backs with a touchdown on 12% of his carries. Another interesting one on him, amongst runners with at least 30 outside or stretch zone carries, his 9.4 yards per attempt was second to only Darrell Henderson, who will be watching for the Los Angeles Rams this year.
Piggyback on that, because they're going to be in a number of blowouts, he's going to get a lot of running time too. So he is a great player to watch for big time numbers.
Yeah, he's fun to watch, and I'll be fascinated to see, with the valuation of running backs in the NFL draft, where that ends up playing out for him and where he gets drafted. Let's take a quick break and go to Corey March for a word about SIS's College Football Weekly Projections.
Sports Info Solutions has just released weekly college football projections for the first time. The projections cover all 130 FBS teams and are available on rotowire.com for $9 a week or $70 for the full season. Sports Info Solutions is the premier source for football charting data and has years of experience creating projection models. Our projections will give you an edge in all of your college football endeavors, from creating dominant daily fantasy lineups to finding inefficiencies on prop betting lines. Go to rotowire.com to get your subscription today.
All right, coming right back in, let's take a trip to the Big Ten, stay kind of on the eastern half of the country, and talk about the top contenders there. It's been Ohio State for a while. Brian, is this the year that Michigan can challenge them?
I'm less confident that it is, and I'm really going to hedge a bet here because my numbers say, of course, Ohio State is still on top. They have had Michigan's number. The biggest factor, as we just talked about, program ratings, program consistency. Ohio State still has that. They're a better recruiter overall than Michigan, et cetera. The fact that they're going through a coaching change, the fact that they've lost their quarterback and are starting over or are starting new in that position makes me feel like Michigan may finally, sort of crest that hill. On the other hand, Michigan can't be trusted to do that yet, and until I see it, I don't think that I personally could feel confident in picking them. So I am still leaning Ohio State as the favorite in the conference, and certainly the Big Ten East is the heavier weight. So I think it really comes down to the two of them.
And as we look across to the western part of the conference, who do you like to come out of there?
I'm going to go with Iowa, mostly just to be a little bit a contrarian. I think everyone's picking Nebraska as the hot hand, perhaps, or Wisconsin to kind of bounce back after a dip down. I have Iowa as 15th overall in my projected FEI rating, so they're right there going to be in the mix. They've got a manageable schedule, maybe not one that is devoid of any pitfalls, but I'll pick Iowa because few people are talking about them yet, and I think they're going to be right in the mix with it's really a thickly contested conference. There are 5 or 6 teams in that division that I could possibly foresee winning it. So why not the Hawkeyes?
Yep. Aaron and I were discussing the AFC South and the NFL and how everybody's packed together in there. I think you could say the same thing about the Big Ten West. One player in the Big Ten East that I want everybody to keep an eye on, you honestly can't miss him if you're watching an Ohio State game, is Chase Young. He led the nation in pressures last year with 77. Josh Allen, who is single-handedly running the preseason for Jacksonville, was second with 67 total pressures. So that's 10 more for Chase Young last year. Just somebody who absolutely jumps off the film for Ohio State, and I think looking at a top 5 draft pick next year. And
I'll point out that in the projection factors that we do in the book, Ohio State is 117th in the nation in returning offense, but ninth in returning defense. So this defense should be stiff.
They definitely should be. They don't project as the top defense. Michigan's actually got an edge on there according to my FEI numbers, but they do have the talent. They do have the returning production, and to be honest with you, their numbers might be a little bit low, more because of the unusual pair of games and kind of blowout fashion that they had against. They gave up a lot of points in a couple of games, but otherwise were a really strong defense last year. So I could definitely see them being the strength of the conference and leaning on them in that regard.
Looking forward to seeing how that one plays out. Okay, let's keep moving it west and go to the Big 12. In this conference, I think, as we move kind of west throughout the country, we see a little bit less the high-end talent that we saw in, say, the SEC. Oklahoma is a team that a lot of people like here. I've heard some people with Texas being a team that they think could contend. What do you make of the top contenders in the Big 12?
Well, we've heard from everyone why in the world aren't our numbers picking Texas to be better than they are? I have FEI as projecting Texas all the way down at number 50 overall, 50, which is, I'm going to own it when it is dead wrong this year. And but at the same time, I think my numbers and others for that matter are really cautious about Texas. They're the hot pick because of how well they finished the year with a strong win in a bowl game against Georgia. They went 1-1 against Oklahoma, who went to the playoff, and they've got a coach that everyone kind of wants to rally behind. But their data outside of those big games is really pedestrian, and they don't have a lot of production returning. So the inputs to a projection system suggest that Texas is not going to be all that this year. Are they going to be all the way down at number 50? Maybe the numbers are being a little too harsh, but I have Oklahoma not necessarily running away with the conference, but they are head and shoulders over the next group that I'd put personally Texas in there, even though the numbers are a little further down. I'd put Iowa State in there, and my numbers like West Virginia more than most. That's a bit leaning on their recent past more so than their kind of returning stars, et cetera. And plus they lost their coach in the offseason as well to Houston. But I think Oklahoma is going to emerge on top. I just don't see necessarily a playoff champion coming out of this conference, no matter how we slice it.
I mentioned earlier about Tua Tagovailoa being second in the nation in IQR. He dropped down to third in the nation in IQR last year, if you include Jalen Hurts, his teammate, who's now with Oklahoma, of course. He threw catchable passes on 87% of his 70 attempts last year. So I'm really intrigued to see what he does in this offense. But I got to say, I am nervous about the offensive line. I think that people are expecting this to be the same Oklahoma offense. Just plug in another, high draft pick quarterback in there. I don't think this is the same talent from the quarterback, not shocking anybody there. But I think even more importantly, this is a whole rebuild on the offensive line that went from being the most dominant in the country over the last 2 years. Is that a concern for you with them, Brian, or you think they're just too good that they'll overcome that in Lincoln Riley's system?
It is a concern. My numbers project them to have the top offense, and it's, again, because Lincoln Riley has proven to kind of plug and play. But yes, Jalen Hurts is a different kind of quarterback than Kyler Murray. The offensive line is different. Will they be quite as explosive? I doubt they will be, but they still will be a top offense because of Lincoln Riley. I think the key question is, are they going to improve at all on defense? They were dreadful on defense last year and still made the playoffs. So if they counterbalance a fallback on offense to even modestly strong, not elite strong, but still improve on defense, they can still be a top 10 team and win the Big 12.
Yeah, Aaron, you were always talking about how defense is less stable year over year in the NFL. I haven't actually looked into this. I don't know if you have either for college football, but there would seem to be reason to believe that if they can maintain some of what they've been doing offensively and the defense kind of regresses back to the mean, then I'm with you there, Brian, on reason for optimism.
I've never looked at it for college, and I don't know if Brian has either. Have you ever looked at whether offense is more consistent from year to year than defense is?
I haven't noticed one more than the other. I've done a little bit of regression analysis on it, and I just had it varies by team more so than being able to say with a broad brush offense is more consistent or defense is more consistent.
I think some of it might be. I mean, part of the theory of why offense is more consistent than defense is because so much is determined by one player, which is the quarterback. And in college football, the quarterback is changing a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense. And honestly, defensive philosophies and maybe even coaching stability at coordinator positions might be very different at the college level too. So that's that's a great project idea to take a closer look at. Thanks for the idea.
We'll stand by to see how that one plays out. All right, one more major conference to talk about, the Pac-12. Can we even consider them a major conference, Brian?
I don't think they're going to put anybody in the playoff if that's the marker that we measure conferences by, which is how they've missed it multiple years in a row now. I do think Washington is the favorite, and my numbers and others like Utah to be a good contender too. But until USC kind of returns to championship level form, and with it the kind of profile and cachet that they bring, nobody's really going to pay too much attention to the Pac-12, and I do think that they're going to be out of the playoff run because everyone will have picked up a loss or two by the end of October. I don't see them being nationally relevant if that's our measuring stick.
And then a nationally relevant quarterback is certainly Justin Herbert. And he was 24th in IQR in 2018, a 59% completion. I think that's a large part of why he came back to school, if I had to guess. But he did throw 74% catchable passes. And on a smaller sample size in 2017, he was 7th in the nation in IQR. What do you think about what we can expect from him? Can he get his efficiency up to that point where he was in 2017 with the full volume of really having the offense on his back? What do you think we can – is there any thoughts from either of you guys really on what we can expect there?
I think a leap forward is possible. I talked about Oregon a little bit in my when I released my FEI projections last week. A leap forward is possible, but it sort of takes a massive leap forward for them to go from a good offense to an elite offense. So I don't see that, but improvement. So I have them projected as the 22nd best offense in the nation. If he leaps up in efficiency, maybe they crack the top 15. But that isn't on the par with the high flying offenses that are the playoff contenders, frankly. They all ranked in the top 10 and many in the top 5 last year. So are they going to be pushing the envelope and kind of improving to the point where they are contending for a playoff appearance? I don't think so. But Justin Herbert being more efficient, they can be better for sure.
And I don't know if they have receivers who are high draft prospects the way some of the other quarterbacks. Tua has Jerry Jeudy, for crying out loud.
Yeah, he's just unbelievable. Going back to the AJ Green Julio year, you kind of have to go back to remember a prospect that just looks as all around brilliant as him in kind of every phase of his game. All right, let's take one more quick break and talk about the Football Outsiders and SIS premium charting data and NFL projections. And then we will be back in at the end with Brian to talk about our national semifinals and title outlook.
I want to talk to you about two products featuring Sports Info Solutions data that you'll find on Football Outsiders in our premium section that'll be of use to you during the 2019 season. First of all, let's talk about weekly fantasy projections for $25. They'll give you projections for all the fantasy positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, even kicker and defense, to help power not only your start-sit decisions for your regular team, but all of your DFS decisions. Then you can also get NFL charting data for $30. Go beyond the standard NFL stats with meticulous dissection of every play. All of this data goes back to 2015 and will be updated everywhere during the 2019 season, including broken tackles for both offense and defense, pressure rate, play action rate and performance, defensive player pressures, receiver drops, and quarterback charting metrics, including target totals, yards per pass allowed, and success rate. Again, that's updated every week during the 2019 season. Plus, you get all the data going back to 2015 for just $30. Go to footballoutsiders.com/store.
Coming right back in, I've just been notified by my good friend Aaron that I forgot one specific team in going through the 5 major conferences. Brian, what can we make of Notre Dame this year?
Well, I'm happy to answer the question, but I will give my every year answer as a lifelong Notre Dame fan, but a very realistic lifelong Notre Dame fan. The Irish are going to be good, but they aren't going to be playoff good this year. I have my numbers say they're going to lose 3 times. I'll give them losing twice. They play on the road at Georgia this year. They play on the road at Michigan, so those are obvious examples of their toughest outs. But they have finally, I think, returned to sort of solid program status where for many a decade over the last 20 years I've been watching them, you never knew what to expect year to year. But this year the Irish, they're not going to be a 12-0 good, but they're going to be very good and make us Irish fans proud.
I'll be excited to. Hopefully, those will be good games. Those 2 that you mentioned, because I always like to see those exciting matchups. All right, so if it's not going to be Notre Dame, Brian, according to the FEI, who can we expect to see in the national semifinals this year?
Well, the FEI is going to pick Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, and Oklahoma, and that's awfully chalky. But those teams have the best chances to run the table, which is certainly going to be favorably ranked favorably in the committee's eyes, or even with a single loss. I personally don't think the committee is necessarily going to place 2 SEC teams in the playoff, of course, because not only do I think, though they could be 2 of the top 4 teams in the country, as the arguments played out last year, Georgia almost made a similar argument last year. I think there's going to be too many losses in the loss column, and so like I said earlier, I'm going to personally vault Georgia ahead Alabama, and my going out on a limb this year is that the Crimson Tide are going to miss the playoff for the first time, and instead I'll have Ohio State fill that spot. So Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oklahoma are my picks for the playoff.
Any argument from you there, Aaron? I think you make a compelling case on all fronts there, Brian.
Unfortunately, college is a place where chalk tends to reign. Either that or the very unexpected. I don't know. Do you have a particular team that you like as a sleeper? One of those teams that's outside the top 5 that could jump up and make that playoff appearance?
So I do, but I'm going to go against what I said of the Pac-12 not being a contender. If there's a team that's going to really surprise and emerge, it's Utah. I think they've got the potential to be a super strong defense. My numbers have them 16th overall, but they could be because they don't have a lot of strong competition in the Pac-12, they could go on an impressive defensive run, win every close game, and kind of sneak backdoor into the playoff, but not win a game once they get there. So if I'm going to pick sleeper, I'll go with the Utes.
Yeah, they'll have to win at Washington on November 2nd. That's the one thing, is that they go to Washington.
That is true.
We'll all be watching that one. All right, we got the final four teams. Who's it going to be coming away as the national champions this year?
I'm going to lean Georgia. I love Clemson as far as their run to get to that point. And I guess if I'm playing narratives, they get a little bit boosted too much. I'm sure we'll be talking team and program of the century in every playoff ad that we'll see in the ramp up to those games. But I'll pick the Bulldogs to finally get back on top after their most recent championship way back in the early 80s.
I love the choice. On that note, we will sign off. Thank you to all of our listeners, and please help spread the word about the Off the Charts Football podcast by subscribing, rating, and writing reviews. You can hit us up on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS, at FB Outsiders. I'm at Matt Mano, and Aaron is at FO_A Shots. For our guest, Brian Fremeau, and my co-host, Aaron Schatz, and our producer, Justin Stein, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.